Hi, this is Jürgen Rasmussen. I am utterly fascinated by false memory cases. And I think there are so many real lessons that can be extracted by studying false memory. There's so much to learn about how the human mind works, not just your own mind, but the minds of others. So in this video, I'm going to be delving into five well-known false memory cases that you, in addition to watching this video, can read up on and learn more about. And I'm going to be sharing some of my observations and conclusions, what I think we can kind of learn from these cases. So the first one I want to talk about is a what you could call pure false memory case, and it involves Hillary Clinton. So back in the 2008 presidential election, she told a story about visiting Bosnia back in 1996 during the war. And she said, I remembered we landed under sniper fire. There was supposed to be some sort of greeting ceremony, but there was no one there. So we just ran with our heads covered to the vehicles to get to the base. Now, there were quite a few journalists, at this particular event, and it was well documented what actually happened. Turn out there was no sniper fire, and turn out there was actually a greeting ceremony where Hillary Clinton was given flowers by a young girl. Now, when she was confronted with this, she said, I made a mistake. I had a different memory. I'm a human being, which might be a revelation to some people. Now, what do I think we can learn from this particular case? Of course, it is possible that Hillary Clinton was just lying, that she knew consciously that none of this ever happened, but that she just created this story. Now, of course, the morale of the story is, that she had been out, as we say in Norway, a winter's night before, that she was a strong, tough leader who knew about the realities of war and knew how to handle stuff. Now, I don't think that the interpretation that she was deliberately lying is the most plausible one. I actually think it's more likely that she's honest in the sense that it truly is a false memory. We all likely go around remembering stuff that never happened and feel certain about it. This is a common psychological phenomena. And one reason why I lean in the direction of thinking that it's a false memory instead of her deliberately lying is that, again, there were so many journalists, there for that trip that the whole event is so well documented that she must have known that she would have been exposed and called out over this. So I think one important message here is that false memories, as I said, we all likely have them. We all likely go around remembering stuff which we didn't actually experience. And it's important to realize too that false memories are not restricted to the therapy context. They happen in other contexts in life. They're not just the results of an interaction with a therapist who suggests the existence of dissociated or repressed memories. For me, Hillary Clinton, her political preferences are very far away from mine. And I view her as a very power hungry, very narcissistic individual. That's how I view her. Of course, other people will view her differently. And it's important to realize here that, with my political preferences being strongly libertarian, I'm kind of inclined to not give her the benefit of the doubt, right? Um, but I think one of the benefits of looking into false memory cases is that it's easier to have a bit more humility about our own thought processes, our own conclusions. Specifically, if someone tells you something which isn't true, that's not automatically evidence that they're lying. Lying meaning they're telling you something that they know is not the case and they're intending to mislead you. Of course, they could be just misremembering, and in that particular case, they're not lying because while what they're saying is not true, they actually believe that they're telling the truth, right? But there also is this possibility that the person has a false memory and is not deliberately trying to deceive you. So just knowing that and opening up for that might help us all be a bit more humble, a bit more open minded, a bit less certain when it comes to people telling stories that we either know not to be true or that we are doubtful of. I'm not arguing here for being naive or gullible. I'm just saying that sometimes when we think that people are deliberately lying, they may, in case, actually have false memories. There are other people. There are some interesting, psychologists historically who have written about their own false memories. One is the esteemed psychologist Elizabeth Loftus. When she was 14 years old, her mother died. That's historically accurate. And she was found drowned in a swimming pool at some sort of family gathering. And there was some other family member who discovered the body in the pool. Now, about 25 years later, Elizabeth Loftus was at this family gathering where they started talking about the event, and a relative told her with utmost confidence that it was Elizabeth Loftus at age 14 who found her own mother in the pool and asked her if she remembered that. And Elizabeth Loftus did not remember that. But during the next few days, her mind she began to reconstruct it and she began to form a memory of it actually being the case that she discovered her mother's body. And by a week or so, she was confident about it. And then the relative called and said, "Look, I made a mistake. I realized that, I made a mistake. Sorry about that. Of course, it wasn't you who discovered your mother's body." The Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget, the famous developmental psychologist who specialized in children's development, he had this very vivid memory from age 2 of his nanny, you know, having him outside and him being in a stroller, and in a public space, a man trying to kidnap him. And the nanny who he loved, fighting so courageously, against this, kidnapper. And the nanny even getting hurt, getting scratches on her face, and this police officer with a club coming and people rushing, to it. And he also remembered that this was close to the local police station, and he had a very vivid memory of this at age 2. Now, at age 15, the family received a letter from that former nanny who confessed that she made that story up. and she wanted to deliver back to the family this watch she had gotten for saving him, right? So this is an example of how we can hear a story growing up and then after the fact begin to reconstruct our past in such a way that this seems to have become our actual experience. There's something else here too, which is called infantile amnesia, which points to that we human beings, we tend to lose all memories before the age of 2, and most memories before the age of 5 by early adulthood. So that's another reason why this, of course, is a false memory. There's a very interesting other story I'd like to bring up as well. And this is a story from the memory researcher, Elizabeth Loftus. It's a woman called Sally Blackwell. One night, an intruder broke into Sally Blackwell's home, tied her, and the intruder wore a ski mask, and he tied Blackwell and her daughter up and ended up raping them and sexually abusing them for 2 hours before he left. Now, the morning after the rapes and the sexual abuse, she called her workplace and she spoke to a coworker called Lewis Williams and said that she would not be coming in that morning. Later that day, Sally Blackwell's boyfriend was trying to urge her and help her to remember who the assailant might be. And he suggested to her that given that this person was so concerned with hiding his identity, you gotta know who he is. This has to be someone you know. Either someone, you've met at work, or perhaps someone you've met at a party. Now, the moment the boyfriend said the word party, Blackwell had this immediate recognition, a name and a face that popped up into her mind, and that was Clarence Vaughan Williams, who was the husband of Lewis Williams, who she had spoken to on the phone earlier that day. And she went, oh my God, it was him. And he had met the husband of the coworker a few weeks earlier at a party. And this was the only evidence in that case. And Williams ended up being convicted to 50 years in prison based upon the heinous rapes and the sexual assaults. Now, luckily for Williams, 2 months later, Louisiana State Police picked up a guy called John Simoes. I probably butchered that name. And he confessed to 70 crimes, amongst them the rape and sexual abuse of Sally Blackwell and her daughter. And this must have been extremely convincing, and it was videotaped, and they found other corroborating evidence that this was the case as well. So Williams was immediately released, and Simoes was convicted for the crimes. Now, very interestingly, when Sally Blackwell heard about this, she refused to believe it. She said, that's not my memory. This can't be the case. That sometimes happens. So, there's some very interesting stuff to learn from cases like the Blackwell case. And there are many cases like this where people remember the wrong person, and they can't actually remember upon confrontation the person who actually did it. There's another famous case, it's been written a book about it called Picking Cotton. This was back in 1984, a woman called Jennifer Thompson was raped. A guy crawled into her window late at night and raped her, and she realized that she wouldn't be able to fight him off. So she committed to having her eyes open. He did not wear a ski mask, so she could see his face clearly. She committed to memorizing his face and his voice so that she could later pick him up. And as investigation went underway, and based upon her own sketch, police picked up this guy called Ronald Cotton, who had nothing to do with the rape. But in the lineup, Cotton was the one who looked the most like the sketch that she had co-created at the police station. And first, she wasn't that convinced that it was him, but he was the one who looked the most like the rapist. She picked him out, and then she picked him out again at a different lineup. And, the police were encouraging her that she did the right thing. And by the time trial rolled around, she was 100% sure that Ronald Cotton was her rapist. Ronald Cotton was given a lengthy prison sentence. Then in jail, he heard this rumor about a guy called Bobby Poole, who was a rapist, who had admitted to doing to his cellmate the rape that Ronald Cotton was in there for. And he was able to get a new trial. And Jennifer Thompson saw Bobby Poole, her actual rapist, did not recognize him. She felt nothing when she saw him, and she felt fear and hatred and all that stuff when she saw Ronald Cotton. So Ronald Cotton was sentenced again. And then a few years went by, and you had the O.J. Simpson case, and you had, DNA testing, came alive. And he was able to get DNA testing, and the DNA testing exonerated him and proved that Bobby Poole was the actual rapist, right? But very interesting that she still after that, her mind could not, reconcile it, because in her mind she remembered Ronald Cotton, and she had no memories of Bobby Poole. Neither did she have any feelings when she saw him. And today, she says that the rapist no longer has a face. She still doesn't remember Bobby Poole, but in her mind, there's a rapist without a face. So this is interesting because, sometimes we may remember something or construct something which is false, like we identify the wrong person. But even if that information is corrected after the fact, it doesn't necessarily alter or adjust our memories. This is a huge problem with rumors, for example, or during police investigations. If the police go out and they kind of promote to the public that this is the rapist or this is the guy, even if that person is later exonerated, it often doesn't change people's memories or their feelings. They might still remember him as the assailant or the rapist. Something else which is kind of scary about the Sally Blackwell case is that you might think that, oh, Sally Blackwell must be kind of nuts, but no. There's a lot of psychological research that points to that this seems to be how the human mind works largely. People think they make decisions by, rational analysis of the facts, after some event. But the psychological research point to that the human mind is a believing brain. We see patterns, we create patterns that aren't there. We do this very quickly, and we create a narrative. We essentially start by believing And then we use our powers of reason and rationality more like a lawyer to look for evidence that fits what we already believe after the fact, while we discount or are often not even able to see evidence that doesn't fit what we believe. So that's kind of scary to to consider. And what's really scary, if you think about our criminal justice systems, is that judges and lawyers very often tend to believe that they're just in a dispassionate way using objectivity, reason, and logic to look at the evidence, while they very often do the exact opposite, right? This isn't good. Let's hope that, the field of legal psychology will change that over time. Like here in Norway, you can become a lawyer without having a single class either on evidence evaluation or memory or legal psychology or witness psychology. I mean, you can sign up for courses, but you can essentially become a lawyer without knowing anything about any of these topics, and that's just bloody scary. A couple of more cases for you here today, and this is super fascinating. It's the case of Edward Daly. Now, Edward Daly was an alleged war hero from the Korean War. Now, this whole story was exposed back in the New York Times, 31st of May in the year 2000, because the Associated Press started investigating these rumors that Edward Daly and other members of his regiment had essentially massacred civilians. And they contacted Daly, and he confessed to it. He admitted it, and he said that he was haunted by the memories of children screaming, and he had nightmares and all sorts of stuff. Now, fellow soldiers in the regiment remembered Edward Daly as a war hero. They had vivid memories of him fighting alongside them. One of them, in that New York Times article, says that he remembered Daly saving his life by pulling him out of a ditch and into safety. Another one is quoted, to say, I remember he was there. I have so many memories with him. And Daly, organized veteran meetings and went to these meetups, and he wrote 3 books, about his regiment. But when the investigation was done, it was revealed that Edward Daly was never in the Korean War. He was in the U.S., safely behind a office desk, the entire war. And you can make the case that, oh, what a cynical, he clearly exploited, he has been lying. But when he was confronted with the evidence, he said, look, this evidence is compelling. Of course, it has to be that way. But I have all these memories, and they're real, and I feel like I'm living in a dream world. And when fellow soldiers were asked, many of those too, again, had vivid memories of Edward Daly fighting amongst them. Now, this is very interesting, because it turns out Edward Daly was, of course, very interested in war. And his interest really peaked during a time in his life when he was in therapy and his marriage was breaking apart, and he started to organize these veteran meetings and go to, attend these meetings and he went to Korea, with his regimented people, and went to the various sites. And this is an interesting case of collective false memories, because not only did he have those memories, whether he believed in them or not, but many of the other people truly believed in them. And they were probably developed over years of bantering, and Edward Daly being a great narrator, great storyteller, telling these stories, and people influencing each other's memories. So there are quite a few documented cases of collective false memories. So I think some lessons to take from this, again, is false memories do not only occur in the therapy context. And, you know, memory is kind of contagious in a sense. We influence each other's memories by what we reward, what we nod to, what we kind of reinforce. And if you look at Daly, who was very interested in war and who went through a crisis in his life, his mind, we human beings have drives for feeling connected and for feeling significant and for having a sense of purpose. And as a result of these meetings and writing books and going on trips, his mind began to alter or reconstruct all these memories in service of probably feeling connected and feeling special, and feeling as if his life had mission, and the storytelling and the bantering and the connecting with fellow soldiers probably contributed to everyone reinforcing their own memories. There's something else too, for people who work in law enforcement, or people who work in the courts. People have a tendency to automatically think that if multiple people have accused someone of something, well, then it has to be true. Now, granted, if multiple people who don't know each other, accuse someone of something, that of course, makes it more likely that the person is in fact guilty. But it doesn't necessarily mean that. People can get collectively deluded and influence each other's memory, as happened with this particular case. Final false memory case I want to share with you. This one's almost semi-embarrassing. It's from my own life. Back in 2005, 20 years ago, I saw a client for fear of flying. Now, I already started to be mentored by John Grinder at this time, so I knew a lot about, how our experience is constructed and how memories are kind of made up and that sort of stuff. But I was still doing, let's say, hypnotic regression work. I was making, a kind of presentation with clients that this isn't historically accurate and all that sort of stuff. But I did it because it got a lot of good results. I then stopped doing it, but I was still doing some of that stuff. And I worked with a woman with a severe fear of flying, and she got over it in one session. Now, that wasn't the most significant thing, it turns out, for this woman, because during the hypnotic regression, she had what looked to her as this dramatic reliving of her birth. Now, this change lasted for many years. Then she had this emergency landing thing, and some other thing happened in her life, and the fear of flying came back, or she reconstructed it. And she came into my office and she told me this story, and she said, look, what happened in your office 20 years ago was sacred. Reliving my birth is the most awe-inspiring, one of the most awe-inspiring moments of my life. I've told so many people about it. It was so meaningful. And I remember thinking, shit, because this is clearly a false memory, by the way. We have something called infantile amnesia. There's a lot of robust memory science behind this, which essentially means that, we as adults, we have all memories are lost from the age of 2 and before then, and the vast majority of them are lost before the age of 5. Now, a 3-year-old might have some kind of memories from age 2, but as people grow up, they tend to have no access to this stuff. There's several good theories for why this is the case. One of them being that the hippocampus is not developed enough to really encode long-term memories, autobiographical memories, which is a combination of episodic memory and semantic memory. Another one is just neurogenesis, that the production of new neurons overwrites the old neurons. And another one is that it seems as if we need to develop a sense of self and some ability for theory of mind to be able to store autobiographical memories, which are all about the self. And we haven't really developed that strongly enough at age 2 to be able to store these long-term memories. So this is clearly a false memory, but something that was very compelling and that she viewed as a kind of sacred experience. Now, I never really challenged that in the session, but I helped her with her fear of flying by seeing the illusory nature of it, which I really prefer because we don't have to, increase the risk that people end up with these sorts of false memories. And I've gotten texts from her since, and she's been on several flights, and she's doing good. So a couple of things to learn there too. The fact that someone has an experience that they find life-altering or sacred, or that touches something deep inside of them, does not at all mean that it's necessarily true or historically accurate. So the fact that something feels very special and feels very compelling, and that there's a high amount of certainty or strong feelings, is never evidence of the accuracy of something. This could be a useful learning for people who practice altered states or do psychedelics, and who come up with all these insights from the universe, right? Might be pure bunk, even though it feels completely real, right? It's really hard for us human beings to truly grope that learning. And also, the fact that someone changes after, let's say, discovering, in quotation marks, that their fear of flying was connected to their birth, and you update the memories and now they fly comfortably, is not at all evidence that the birth experience was the cause of their issue or anything like that. People can change by constructing false memories and doing stuff with that memory, and have a brand new experience. Might be useful, but it says nothing about truth or accuracy. I'll make more of these videos in the near future. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was useful. If you got anything from it, please let me know. If you have any false memories to share with me, I'd love for you to email me and write me about it. As I said, I find this topic very fascinating, and think that there are so many real lessons to be learned by false memories. Also, know that I see clients from all over the world online. If you'd like to book some sessions with me or explore if you and I could be a good fit, you can email me through provocativehypnosis.com. If you're watching this in September 2025, I have a Seeing Through the Self-Illusion Masterclass coming up. So if you'd like to truly see through the self-illusion and have a felt shift around that course just might be for you. So check out the seminar page at provocativehypnosis.com. If you liked the video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and as always, thanks for listening.